Our next speaker is Matt Overall. He spent the last few years in the airline industry, most recently with Panasonic, developing a strategy for low-cost carrier airlines. He has worked with teams of all types, shapes, and sizes from well before the pandemic struck, from the more traditional office-based to fully remote and more complex hybrid models. His talk will be about keeping change human, and with that, I yield to Matt.
Thanks so much, Carolina. Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here. Thank you for letting me speak. Hopefully, I can add some value to everyone's Friday afternoon. So I'm Matt Overall. I'm currently the CEO of SkiSpring, a startup I founded with a friend and colleague. And so, as I say, onwards and upwards. So, really my talk, about keeping, I wanted to just sort of apologize, I guess, up front, is because, it's not really based in science or anything that, any huge plumbing the depths of humanity. It's really just a series of anecdotes and observations from me, really, who's just spent 20 years doing this kind of thing, building software and working with people. It's been doing things that seem difficult, things in difficulty. What does that mean? It means, with not much budget, not the right resources, maybe the timing was crazy. Maybe it was technically new and no one had done it before. So, they seem difficult at the time to me. I've worked with some really lovely people. That always helps. And so, it's a collection of their expertise as well. I've also obviously worked with people that were not so nice, but that's all part of the journey. And it seemed to make other people happy, the stuff we've done. It's either been commercially successful, made a big brand a few more dollars, or it's been reputationally successful and moved a team or brand forward in reputation, or it's sort of unlocked something that somebody was trying to do for a long time that they never really were able to get to. So that's always been nice. Obviously, it's not all been success. You learn a lot from failures too. And really, I guess the idea of the presentation is to talk about some things that maybe help you think about things in new ways. And it's kind of to illustrate how I think about things in a non-sort of direct fashion sometimes in order to sort of unlock problems that might be there, and it's all to look to other places. So I kind of apologize because really it's a talk about impossible advice. There's so much advice, it's really hard to take advice, and it's just 5 more things to make you worried, right? So you've got the technical worries and all of the technology, and then this is 5 new things I'm going to introduce that I suggest that work for me. They may or may not work for you. So the first position is, the first thing I want to talk about is teamwork, essentially. The us and we piece. I always like to think when I start something is there's a game when I was a kid called Top Trumps. It's a trading card game. You have each card has values, right? Magic the Gathering, these are all, models that we're probably familiar with if we've played those kind of games. And every time I start something, a phase, a whole project, a new job, whatever it is, I like to kind of assemble that deck of cards, right? And it changes every time because you've got new people, new customers, new users, or technology has changed, a new framework is out, or, some revision of an API. And there's new goals. The organization you're working for has changed. Something new's come in. And, COVID's a great example of a new world. Sometimes the whole world just changes underneath you. And so at the start of that process, you can swap some cards in, right? Cards representing people, probably. You might want a team, might not be the right fit for that project at the time. So you can change some cards, and maybe you can change the categories, right? Maybe you can change how people are going to judge success. Maybe it's not all about revenue. Maybe it's about reputation. So, the ability to change those is a good place to do it at the beginning when you restart these phases. And think about the strategy you're going to use that deck for, those people, that team. It needs to be right for right now, obviously, but it also has to, play out the contingency. What's the defensive use of that deck? How you, those people, how they're going to behave in a crisis, how you're going to pivot if something comes along. And you won't see the other player's hands, right? Your opponent, if we want to be adversarial, which we shouldn't be, but I'm going to. If the opponent, sometimes they don't know the hand because they don't think too deeply about it, or it's just what they've got. And sometimes they don't want you to know it. Sometimes it is a bit adversarial with a client, right, or a team or somebody else in the organization. And so you're not always going to see that hand. And on that note, it's easy when it's easy, right? This is Voltaire, old time, had some sense back in 1600, more so than I'll ever have, I'm sure. Each player must accept the cards life deals him or her, but once they're in hand, he or she must alone decide how to play the cards in order to win the game, right? So what's great about this, once the game's done, once the dice are rolled, it's really a bit of a pain in the bum. Any leader can just say, if I had a better team, it's easy to make success from a great team. They kind of create success themselves, right? The trick is making success from not the greatest beginnings. And so, nothing annoys people more than longing for previous hands, right? Oh, we used to have a great team that would have done this easily. No one wants to hear that, right? It's just a pain. Asking to change your hand, change at the beginning, but through the game, through the process, if you keep saying, oh, can I just reset this? Can I change how you're going to measure me? It's just not useful, right? It's just a pain, right? And use the full deck, right? It's really tempting when you're in the game. Okay, you put somebody on a team, they're a Bluetooth expert, and you think the Bluetooth might be a problem. This is a problem I had in my, in a role in a project. And then the Bluetooth thing crops up, but they're doing something else, and you kind of think, oh, well, I don't want to interrupt them. I'll get this other person to do that, maybe take on that task. Maybe they can make a go of it. Remember what the deck was laid out for. Stick to those plans, stick to those thoughts, because it's harder in the heat of the battle, in the heat of the game, to make sensible decisions. So go back to that opening strategy, or don't forget to at least consider it. So, again, teamwork, these are the basics, right? Everybody's got a comment about teamwork, whatever, go look online for inspirational, motivational posters, and there's thousands. But, some things are universally true. Don't forget them. I always like to remind myself, you're not an island, again, 1600 bit of insight, it's still true. If you're doing something really important or world-changing, it's probably not going to be just you, unless you're lucky enough to be Einstein or Stephen Hawking or somebody of that magnitude. Certainly not me. And the sum of the parts, the whole tends to be bigger than the sum of the parts. You've got the right people; they produce magic. It's intangible human magic, and you're trying to gather that, right? So don't forget those things. But I think the bit that's sort of less obvious is, again, stealing from gaming. You need to create legends with clans. Gamings have these concepts of groups of people, clans, squads, whatever you want to call them, right? And people love a story, right? Humans love stories. And a clan or a group or some sort of gathering like that allows you to build a framework for stories, right? It gives you a place to store shared experiences, good and bad, right? There's nothing greater than talking in the office about the battle scars you've got from that last thing you did and you got through it, right? That's a framework for that. And also, people want to attach themselves to success, right? They like... nobody wants to put their career at risk for a new thing. Very few people have the flexibility to do that. They have other priorities in their life. And so stories are episodic, right? They have stages. Not everyone is going to warm to a story on day one. And so if you build success through smaller episodes of your story, and you allow people points where they can attach themselves to that story, you'll get better buy-in, right? Rather than just trying to create it from day one. It's a success to build, right? And if you think of it as a story and a legend, it's easier to sort of work out how you can fit that together. The other thing is, it's no surprise that when you play a computer game, you're the defensive player, you're the magic player, right? Because that means you have to recruit, right? And recruiting is great because you go and sell more copies of the games for the games company, right? So you've just sold 3 extra games that they didn't have to sell. And you should think about that recruitment strategy yourself. What are the openings? How are you going to get your members to bring people to you, to come to you? Because it's a key criteria of growing the message, right? Clans are branded. Normally, even these, 3 teenage kids playing, World of Warcraft, probably have got a little site they built. They've probably got a logo. They've got some little rules and stuff. Clans have a brand. A brand is another name for a culture, right? And people want to understand the culture. It grounds them. Avoid one-person parties, right? It's nothing worse than going to a sad, lonely party where you're the only person there. So if you succeed and you go to the celebration party and you're the person there and you're on your own, you've made a mistake, or, it's probably not going to be as widely recognized as you'd like it to be. So just try and avoid ending up in that situation. You want as many people at that celebration party as possible. And so that's why the legends are important. We all love a good baddie, right? Kids with the pantomimes in the UK, everyone loves to shout at the wizard or the bad wizard or whatever. Be very careful. They're very powerful. Use the power of nemesis with great respect, because what you mustn't do is make your users the baddie. And a lot of projects, you start to see this breakdown of trust amongst the team building and the users, whether they're internal or consumers, and that lack of trust. So you can use concepts, you can use lots of things, but don't, end up hating, or encouraging people to form a union against something that's ultimately part of the clan, right? It's part of the system. That's a great. I've worked today a long time. We love putting people into cohorts, right? This looks like X, X looks like Y. We can make assumptions about it. That's great, brilliant. That's great for data. Awesome, I love it. It's really, really useful. It's not so great to be in the cohort, right? Everyone likes to be individual. There's a few cases where you don't want to be unique. You don't want to go to the doctor and have him say or her say, this is you're unique. I've never seen this before. That's bad, right? But if you're a brand or, a customer, you want people to recognize your uniqueness, right? It's important. It makes you who you are. This on the left here is I don't know, for people who are not at school at the same time as me, this was instead of projectors, computer projectors. This is an overhead projector. And I used to have a teacher that would, at the beginning of the year, he'd wheel out this stack of paper, transparencies that he'd place on this projector one by one and just run through it. He'd just go, here's the course, I'm just going to run through it. Then there was no respect for me as a person or my classmates in the nature of how I learned. He was just going to run through this stack of transparencies at his own pace, and I was expected to absorb it, right? And it feels very dehumanizing and it's hard to engage. And it wasn't a great experience. And I would encourage you to try and avoid, making your users feel like that, or the people around you. In some elements, highly regulated industries, they sometimes have something called a function request register or something named thereabouts. Essentially, when was this feature asked for and who asked for it? And it's so you can track back in an emergency or something, a crisis, not a crisis, but a failure, a catastrophic failure, why that's in there. Why did that person ask for it? When was it asked for? How did it get the software? And it's really useful. So, we don't want to be in a highly regulated industry because it's difficult sometimes. But when you're thinking about functions, you really need to tie it to, who did want this? Have we made that actual, the person that represented somebody or was the person that wanted this, would they be happy with this, right? And so when you have that register, it does give you that direct line of audit that is actually quite useful just in terms of generally respecting your users. In marketing, there's always personas, and I would encourage everyone, if you haven't come across this, it's really useful. You need to personify the product. So, we're building this, Terry, he's a 25-year-old web developer. He works really hard during the week, but at the weekends, he doesn't work very hard, loves to go out cycling with his friends, plays online games. Flesh it out, get somebody to flesh it out, and then use it, argue about it. Is Terry going to press this button? Is he really going to do this? It doesn't sound like Terry. Terry would be out on the weekend. He's not going to he doesn't need a remote version of the software because he's going to do it in the office. Whatever that is, but you really need to, use the names, use the people because it solidifies it in your mind. Big solutions. We all know big solutions are decomposable into lots of tiny solutions, right? That's no insight. I don't think this is that much insight either, the smaller bits. But what I'm saying here really is, when you're solving those smaller problems, it's not really great. If you've got, you're trying to collect data about vehicle movements, for example, and there's a representative of the business works on the gate and he or she records the movements on a piece of paper, and you're all excited. You're like, hey, yeah, Denise, we've got this great new app we're going to give you to do that. Look, it's cool. It's on an iPhone. That's not really better, right? It's just different. And Denise is going to be like, well, okay, it's a smart iPhone and I can probably do some other stuff on it, but I'm just recording fans, right? Maybe you can add some gamification, maybe you can add some reward, try and find that thing that makes it better for that person, because hundreds of better solutions make a general better whole. So don't lose sight of just different isn't really good enough, right? Don't diminish, right? There's, people in an organization, everyone's, it's a tendency to kind of go, oh, well, they're just doing that thing over there. The word just is it's a great measure of that. If you're saying, well, they're just doing this and they're just doing this, then, you're probably going to find that those people will start to reject your transformational change because, you're sort of diminishing what they do. People aren't robots, right? They want to feel valued no matter what their part of that transformation is. So be careful to guard against your language and language informs action, essentially. Be a hunter of things. So, what are things? Why? Everyone's looking out for things. Specifically, I can say it clearly, I mean things non-obvious, non-technical things, right? Obviously, you're going to look out for the technical stuff because that's the job, right? It's probably the thing you know best if you're involved in technology like me. I'm going to know the risks of that. You might want to call this unknown unknowns. I don't know. You might have another word for it. But, it's things that people won't tell you. They either don't know or they're embarrassed or they can't tell you, right? So it's things that maybe it's a deficiency in the culture of the business that you're working for. Maybe it's that something doesn't quite work. It just is a bit off. They can't sit in front of their boss and tell you them because it's going to make them look bad, right? So you need to find those things and you need to tease them out, because people aren't going to volunteer them. And they can be fundamental. Ignore the technology without getting these things right. They can kill your project it doesn't matter how great the technology is, it might kill the project, right? Because it just won't get through certain things. We all know about things like compliance and branding. You should have those in your comms plan anyway. But, what happens beyond those measured systems? What's happening in the non-measured systems? Just two little sort of anecdotes to sort of bring that to life, I guess. I worked for a company. We were doing a huge brand. It was an app, millions of downloads. Not a small app by any chance, by any stretch. And every time we did the testing, it kept coming back. We kept failing the testing regime. When the MD was signing off, we were kind of like, we've been doing it, inshore teams and offshore teams. It wasn't just me in a room with a team doing it. It was a lot of people. And every time the MD would come back and say, look, I'm not getting the experience I want. It's just not working for me. And when we dug into it a little bit more, and we spent a lot of time and energy and money and love and on trying to get this right. And when we dug into it, what was happening is the MD's daughter had an older handset that we hadn't put in our testing plan, right? Because it didn't represent a commercially viable. We weren't worried about the 0.3% of the audience that had the handset. So we could have just spent forever arguing with the MD about that, or we could just absorb that handset into the plan, right? And we didn't argue with the MD because that's how he sees the world. That's his experience of the world, right? His teenage daughter is the typical user for him, and he's not going to change that easily or give that up because it's too much. So, we had to change the testing plan. It wasn't that big a deal. We were testing lots of handsets anyway. It's the era when that was much more necessary than now, maybe. And then it just sailed through and we never had to talk about it again, right? So, a thing that was unusual and unexpected. No one was going to tell us that on day one. The other part, I worked, again, a big brand, bringing together a huge sort of national campaign, advertising campaign, different types of media channels, different interactions, those kind of things, mobile, web, apps. And a smaller vendor was coming in to present their solution, and it was great. It was a great presentation. But brands are very funny creatures, right? Quite rightly, they are obsessed with presentation and how you treat them and how you think of them. It's their whole raison d'etre is all about those kind of things. And this person at the end of the presentation, they threw up a slide. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Let's do some questions, which we did for 15 minutes. But the slide had the competitor's brand on it. Right. And it was there for 15 minutes and everyone had to awkwardly look at it and be like, oh, let's, when the person left the room, there wasn't an explicit like, oh, that they're rubbish. They did that, they disrespected our brand. But there was definitely a kind of like lack of attention to detail there. Right. That person should have thought you just don't, you need to change the presentation or take the slide down quickly. Right. If it's a genuine mistake, don't just sit there and try and front it out, because it's kind of disrespectful. And so they didn't get the work. Hopefully it wasn't just because of that, but they are these fickle human decisions that can affect what you're doing that supersede the technology. So be aware of those. Going completely left field now, I wanted to talk about collar eggs. So collar eggs is a mental model you like to think of. It is the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, 1972. So nothing to do with technology, but interesting because what it does is it attempts to solve a problem that is how do you not hit each other when you're in the sea. The sea is surprisingly crowded. You'd think that it's empty, but actually everyone congregates in the safe areas. So like aircraft, right? We tend to route people through safe zones. And so there's a lot of collision that happens. I was surprised. I kept nearly hitting people when I went sailing. And so you need a system. And the system basically sets out a pecking order, an order of priority. At the bottom of vessels or structures that are flowing, but not under command, right? Obviously, you give way to those because they're not going to give way back because they've got no ability to. And then you sort of move up. This ability to maneuver is reduced, so things people are working or dredging, for example, constrained by draft. If you're a ferry, you can't just move inland, right? Because you've got people on board and you've got a bigger depth you draw than a boat. Fishing, sailing, you haven't got an engine, obviously, whereas, if you've got an engine, you've got a bit more advantage. And right at the top is seaplanes. Even that's on there, right? So if you're a seaplane, you get the least right of way in the sea. And why it's interesting and what, I like to think of how it sort of affects my behavior is that if you look at it, it's the people who are the least able to make change that get the most priority, right? The seaplane can move quickly, the power boats, right? They can move quickly. They're making changes, corrections the whole time, right? They're just moving quickly. They're in that mode. They're in that mindset, right? The pilots are looking out. They've got the systems. If you're dredging or you're, constrained by dredging, you can't really do much, right? You're just on this journey. A lot of people relying on you. You've got these other pressures. And in organizations, a lot of people are like that, right? You might be, you've got a lot of power when you're creating change and transforming a business. You've got a lot of trust. You've got the story. You've got the excitement. And other people are just getting stuff done. And you've got to be very careful to respect that. You can't just plow through them, right? You've got to work with them. And actually, what's really interesting about coal regs is that there is no right of way. It's a misnomer. No one has right of way. What you have is two vessels, and one is expected. The vessel that notionally we would like in a car would have right of way. They're called the stand-on vessel, and the other vessel is called the give-way vessel. Well, the standard vessel, it's obliged, not asked, obliged to maintain its course, right? So the person that's supposed to be, that is constrained by draft, they can't just start weaving, right? They've got to remain constant, because the person that's giving way needs to kind of have a mental map of what they're going to do, how they're going to go around them, how they're going to get in front of them, and also sometimes you're standing on for one vessel and then you've got to give way to another yourself. So it gets complicated. But the golden rule, or the sort of the end point of it, is that everybody has a responsibility to avoid a collision. So even the vessel that is maintaining its course, if it gets to the point where it's going to be involved in a crash, it has to do something, right? So everybody has to come together to avoid a crash. That's a great video you might see if you go on a sailing course where there's two motorboats hurtling towards each other and the people on deck are just shouting, my right of way, and they collide, right? Because they're obsessed with right of way and they don't think about taking corrective action because they're so obsessed they're right. And in a business, you can't just crash the fleet, right? You can't just plow through it, because you need those little vessels that are doing other work are important in the organization. They're not, you might be doing a mega $1 million project, but other things are happening. You're not the only boat in the ocean, right? And so bringing those people with you, and being constant and clear about your navigation is useful in an organization. Also, it feels bad if you look back from your motorboat and everyone behind you is in the water drowning. It's not a great experience for you either. I would argue, unless you're crazy, maybe. So the next thing, CRM. So not CRM as in the CRM we're all used to. This is actually stolen from aviation. By the way, those slides, the text on the coal regs, and these slides are lifted from Wikipedia, so easy to go and look these up. Very interesting read. I won't read them all out because it's too many words. This is crew resource management. So what they found in investigating a series of air crashes is that the flight crew, the people on deck, were too scared to bring to the captain's attention, for various reasons, cultural or hierarchical, rather than bring to the attention and call the captain out, they would die, right? Literally, instead of going, Captain, something's going wrong, it was too awkward and too controversial to do that, so they just let it happen, right? Which is crazy when you think about it, right? And a guy called Todd Bishop developed a sort of 5-step strategy for how air crew should behave in this kind of situation. It's nice, simple stuff, as you'd hope in these sort of situations. You open, get someone's attention, you state the concern, you state the problem, which is a bit more specifics about the concern, you state a potential solution, and then you obtain agreement. So, hey, Matt, we're not going to hit the deadline because this feature is more story points that I think we're going to burn down. Let's de-scope that feature. What do you think, right? The keys are in about the specificity. I can't say that word either. Being specific, being unambiguous, proposing solutions. These are all good habits for teams to get into. Whether this is your language or whether it's your team's language or your language you give to your clients or your customers, right? And then there's another bit to it, which is that's great because, it's all going well. But, there's this other bit. It's the it's stupid bit, right? Sometimes you haven't got time to formulate all that stuff. Sometimes you just need a big red button you can slam and your consumers can slam or your staff can slam and say, look, this is going wrong. It's stupid. This is not going to work. And you need to give them that mechanism. So your comms plans should try and replicate some sort of methodology. I use this one. As I say, you might not. This is stupid, can be charged. You can change the language, whatever works in your organization. But you've got to be careful. It's never, Matt, you're stupid. David came up with this idea. He's stupid, right? It's just about the solution and the system. It's very important to keep that. And there's some other bits around this that I think are worth touching. I won't talk to them all, but because they're wordy. But there's two sides. I love this model because it just sums up such a broad range of things into very few rules. There's very little fat in this, right? And the sense of we've all seen things like the sender being the person communicating. No frame of reference, we've seen that people just arrive with no context. Oh, this thing's broken. What thing? How? What? If you've done your user support, you'll recognize that immediately. It doesn't work. Okay. Omission of information, and then you move on. Most of those things people pick up on, but the others are more difficult. In inserting bias, it's really hard to see that, but people do obviously. Ignoring body language, that's incredibly important. You can put people off immediately with your message. Being unwilling to repeat yourself, being just saying, oh, well, you should have got it first time, a big problem. And being disrespectful, that comes up twice, actually. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, if you feel you're being attacked or somebody doesn't respect you, it's almost impossible to get the message across. So, that's a sender needs to be aware. And on the flip side to that is a receiver error. So when you're listening with prejudice, obviously I'm just going to hear you but not listen. Poor prep, it's too noisy. I don't know. I've got I'm just going to do my shopping at the same time. Those annoying things, obvious things. I think the one that I see loads in software development, thinking ahead of the sender. I mean, I've done this all the time. I have to fight this one really hard. When you speak to a developer, sometimes you can see their eyes glaze. You're like, we're going to build a shopping cart, and immediately they glaze over. I've built hundreds of shopping carts. They're solutionizing on the fly, and then they don't hear you get to the bit that makes it different because they've already built it mentally. They're already constructing code, and so it's a really important one. And again, these other human ones, ignoring the non-verbal cues. Someone might say something, but that's not what they mean, and it's really important you actually try and think what they're trying to mean here, not what they're saying. Not asking for clarification. It's not weak to ask for somebody to repeat themselves or to change the meaning. It's good practice, and disrespectful communication, obviously. So when you bring that together, why is that important? Because if I sort of bring that together as a summary, what the problem is that anything ruins communication. Like literally the weirdest things. The coffee machine's not working. Everyone's angry, right? Communication takes a dive. You have to make time for it. I know it seems in the middle of a crisis, it's better to be doing something. You have to make time for those comms, to have those little touch points. Let's go and have a cup of coffee. Let's have a sandwich. Let's talk about how you feel. You must be heard. It's important that as a leader, I need my opinion to come across. That's what I'm paid to do, that's what I want to do to get my, to get my vision to reality. But you also have to listen. It's very important and listen, not just hear, right? I think John King talked about earlier, but you need to react, right? You might, there's nothing worse than someone going, okay, thanks, yeah, okay, bye. That's worse, right? It's better to say, look, I've heard you, I've thought about it, I don't agree with you, right? And we're not going to go forward your idea, but I've heard it. I've definitely heard you. I've got another plan I think is better, because people can move on. They can close the door on it and move on, right? If you don't give them that closure of thought, then they'll find it very difficult. And the reason the system beforehand, the CRM system, is important because the reason you have to do it every day. You always have to be polite. You always have to add a solution to your statement of the problem. You always have to have sharp, clear language. Is because the communication will fail at the point you need it most. You cannot implement that system when everything's going wrong. It's too late. You're going to have to just suck up the system you've got, right? So getting everybody to do it every day, to think in that way, is the only way you can protect yourself when it goes wrong, because everyone's going to revert to type. And if type is chaos, you're going to revert to chaos, right? So getting that fluent, that methodology in place is key. I'm keeping an eye on the time there. I'm getting quite close to half an hour, so I'm going to try and speed up a bit if I can. Another area is first aid, right? So again, go and learn first aid. It's good for everybody, but this is some things that come from that. This is from the St. John Ambulance. This is what they tell first aiders to do. Assess the situation quickly and calmly, protect yourself and somebody else from danger, prevent infection, comfort and reassure, assess the casualty and give first aid treatment, and arrange for help if needed. What's noticeable about this slide is that doing something in our game, coding, is number 5. It's not number 1, right? Frantically coding or frantically acting is not what people want to see, right? They want these other steps to come first, because otherwise you're jumping ahead of the game. And, this is a good model to think about that, in a crisis. I like to think, because I'm quite a visual thinker, I like to think of this about starting fires. There's a great quote by a lady called Penny Reid in a series of romantic novels. I haven't read them, I have to say, but they seem very good. You get great reviews. Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. There are crises in the business, and things, you can set yourself on fire. What does that mean? Well, it means, skipping things are important. Maybe not managing people properly, not managing your superiors or your subordinates properly or your sideways properly. Maybe it's not doing, that process you're supposed to do, and things slide, right? The quality goes down incrementally, right? Or more importantly, maybe it's something bigger. Maybe it's your mental health of yourself, right? Maybe, you're starting to get too stressed. Maybe you're unable to function in optimum performance. So, that's for me what being on fire is. And I like fire because it's dramatic. And as you can tell, I'm quite a dramatic person. So generally, people are nervous of things. A kid in a fireworks factory with a box of matches makes everybody nervous, right? Because everybody's watching that person, and it's tiring. If you go into that situation, you come out of it at the end of the day, you're tired because it's been so stressful. You don't want to be that kid with the matches, right? You want to be the calming voice. The other part is that if you're not running around like a headless chicken, panicking, people won't do it either. They'll say, well, it must be under control. They'll take their lead from that. People are sort of, cooperative creatures, and we pick up from those seen and unseen signals. And so people, and also they'll be like, oh well, let's be reasonable. We don't have to commit everything all the time, right? Because that's time. So people can see that they can leave something on the table. However, sometimes, we don't live in a perfect world. I'd love to tell you that nothing's ever been on fire in the projects I've worked on. It has, obviously, because I work in the real world. And sometimes it does. People catch fire, and if you're on the ship or in the building and, you're seeing it gradually light up, people are catching fire, things are catching fire. That's okay, right? Sometimes you just got to deal with it. And sometimes that means catching fire yourself. If you catch fire, you best start planning your leaving party, because you won't be involved the next time because the project got out of control. You might have got the thing done. Great, you've done it, right? Brilliant. Everyone's happy. But how it was done is too nerve-wracking, right? If you're a brand or a billion-dollar business, you can't be running projects in that sort of way, right? And so it's fine if the goal is that important, but remember, it's probably the last goal with that group of people because they will be too worn out. Again, the final medical. No, there's one more off this. I looked at the slide. The importance of triage. So loud voices, we all know this one. They represent something, right? They either represent one person or loads of people. Just be careful about how you listen, right? It's very easy to listen to the loud voices. Obviously, be careful about that. Again, in first aid, you always treat the quiet people first, and that's the next point because they can't advocate, right? So the meetings you're in, you should be calm about, because you are setting the message, you're holding the agenda, you can justify things, you can represent yourself. Worry about the meetings you're not in, right? It's about back to this clan thing. Someone else is going to represent you in those meetings. What are they going to be saying about you? What are they saying about your brand, about your clan? Oh yeah, he's getting it done, but whoa, it's really chaotic. Or they're getting it done, it's calm, I'm confident it's going to get happened. So, how are you going to influence those meetings you're not in? And if people stop inviting you, you're not useful, right? That's why they stopped inviting you, right? So you can argue about that, but the key thing here is that's not necessarily they don't invite you to the meeting. What you'll find is that people will just, over the coffee machine where you were talking about the project, they'll just talk about something else. They'll just talk about the weather or something inconsequential, right? And they won't engage you. And if you start to feel a lack of engagement, you need to fight to find a way to be useful to people. Worse, the bigger first aider, don't make it worse, right? Don't be the person that's going in there and causing even more chaos, right? One that I've suffered from in the past is apologizing with code. You go to meet with a client, they're wildly angry because they're not getting what they think they're going to get. And you start saying things like, or I start saying things, I should say, because it's me I'm talking about. That's okay, because what we'll do is we'll get these other things you wanted done in this next sprint instead. Like, we'll placate you with that. And, the problem with that is that it's not going to happen, right? You haven't got time to do the thing you wanted to do anyway, and now you're promising other things. It's unrealistic. It doesn't ring true. It's just going to happen. And equally, don't write checks you can't cash. That's to your own team. That's the clients. It's to everybody. If you don't get this done, I'm going to fire you. That's not, you can't, you're not going to fire someone in the middle of a project unless they're really terrible or something, so don't kind of, only make promises you can follow through on. And be honest. Don't pretend things aren't what they're not, right? People can see the facts. And if you're just pretending they're not there and trying to talk around them, it's just fake news, right? And nobody likes fake news. Well, maybe some people like fake news, but I don't like fake news. I apologize for some bang in the background. I apologize that it's a crazy street in Spain that I can't control. But so the next thing, the final bit, the hardest thing, right, is be a human. Wow, that's so broad, it's ridiculous. But there are some tricks you can think about for that. There's a great Oscar Wilde quote that I love about authenticity, essentially, is, be yourself, everyone else is already taken, right? Style is personal. There's nothing worse. You have to learn your own style. You have to make mistakes, and, it's difficult because it's awkward and very personal. But there's nothing worse than somebody trying to emulate somebody else's style, right? Trying to pretend to be a different type of leader. Somebody that's not confident, like trying to talk and be confident. It's really awkward. Use your mirrors, right? Your mirrors are your team or your people around you. If every meeting you go to, everybody's aggressive and defensive and controversial, that's because that's what you are, right? That's what you're encouraging people to be, right? If everyone's laughing and joking and, it's lighthearted, not everything's a joke or not hilarious, but, difficult things sometimes need, levity and lightness. And, if you see that in the team, if people are happy and engaged, it's probably a reflection of what you're doing if you happen to be in charge, or if you're even a member of the team. It's very contagious enthusiasm. Be forgiving. What people forget is that your team around you are normally forgiving you all the time. I mean, I know my team. I'm working in Ski Spring. It's the first time I've been a CEO. It's a start with a small group of people. I'm sure they're rolling their eyes the whole time at what I'm doing, and they do it quietly because they're nice people. And if you think that people aren't forgiving you, you're either incredibly amazing or, maybe you're being a bit deluded a little bit, and so be forgiving back. People are going to make mistakes, right? The ability to forgive is really important. People value that from you very much. And the sort of a word about privilege, can't isn't won't, right? I am very lucky. I can get on a plane. I've been asked to, and I have many times, get on a plane. Can you fly to Hong Kong tomorrow and spend a week here? It's great. It's brilliant. I love it. And I can do it, right? If I say to a colleague, come to Hong Kong tomorrow, we've got a really important meeting, and the answer is, I can't, or I won't. You've got to be careful. There's a danger sometimes to sort of see that as a lack of commitment to the business, a lack of commitment to the idea. And you don't know why that person can't do it. Maybe they've got to go to their second job to feed, their family because they're not paid quite as well as they should be. That's something you should address probably if you're able to. But, or maybe they've got a sick relative, maybe there's something else in their life. Maybe they just don't feel like it. Maybe their mental health won't let them do that, right? It's very important. It's not your job, or I don't see it as my job to quiz those people and try and get to the bottom of that. There's something in their life that doesn't allow them to do it. They might love to come to Hong Kong, right, and hang out and go and talk to clients, but they just can't. And sometimes people are embarrassed to say that, and you have to be very careful about how you try and confront them on that. So if you haven't been listening and I bored you to death, this is the edited highlights. People by people, it's all about trust, trusting your team and ultimately trusting you. People want to look at you and your team and say, these are the group of people, that person is who I want to do this for me. It's going to be difficult. I might not agree with them, but I can trust them to get me through it in a safe way. And when I put these things together, the top trumps element is all about flexibility, taking what you've got and making the best of it. The clans element, it builds trust through prior success stories and a bonded sort of shared history. The Cohorts piece, well, that's about predictability. People know how you're going to behave, right? They can work around you. They might not like it, but they can work around it, right? And sound navigation, an awareness of the organization. The CRM, good communication, consistent. People know what they're going to hear from you. You're honest, you're assertive, that's fine. And they know it's honest, they know it's assertive, but they can, again, deal with it. It's something you can deal with. First aid, they know in a crisis you're going to manage the pain well, that you've got a strategy for managing pain. Even more important, you're not going to be causing pain. You're not somebody with a box of matches. And finally, everybody, connection is important, right? Either it's very difficult, over the video and stuff, but, we are all human and humans are drawn to other humans. If you can do a job and have fun, that's better than just doing the job, no matter what the job is, right? And so, making those human attachments is very important. So all to what end? Businesses love mission statements. I think this is probably the one that I would like people to say about teams that I work on when they walk away in those meetings I'm not at. I would like them to say something like, it's the right team for the task we have right now. Not last year, not last week, right now. It's cohesive and coherent, able to understand and state the goals whilst also being resilient enough to deal with problems and changes. Trustworthy and approachable, that's the episodic nature, with the ability to bring colleagues along with them. Getting it done at the right cost to the organization, not any cost, the right cost. Unique and effective. Unique is desirable because, you can charge more for it generally because it's unusual. Interesting to work with and passionate about the goals. Everyone wants to be interested. Sometimes they don't share it, but people want to be interested. They want to be passionate because it makes it more fun. So that was the sort of write-up I would like to see of a team that I'm working with, if I can get to it. It's almost impossible. You get bits of it right, other bits you don't, but that's where I'm always aiming. So thank you very much. That's it. Race through that. I hope it wasn't speaking too fast or too crazy, but yes, thank you. And I think maybe there's questions, or I'm not totally sure about that, but hopefully there is.
Hi there. Thank you for this awesome presentation. I thought it was very great that you stated in the beginning that it's your experience, and it made it all very approachable and just really cool. So thank you very much for that. I would like to ask the audience to keep up the energy and share your revelations and questions to Matt while he's here to answer them. I just made a note here, and it says, don't long for previous cards. And it was my definite favorite. When you were, showing that it's real easy for all of us to kind of look back at the previous awesome thing that we did and think about how, we could be doing that, but no, we can't be doing that. We have to focus on what's happening right now at the moment. How would you start? You made a point about people perhaps not sharing their negative revelations when it comes to things that you are trying to put through the organization. And I was wondering what is your take on trying to tease out those objections that you perhaps don't hear in the beginning?
I think you have to, I couch all my response in this is how I do it in the past. But, I think there's a way, essentially you need to not be horrified by things that your team tell you, right? You need to normalize negativity because then people don't feel that there's going to be, with their negative thing, there's going to be some horrific reaction. They'll be like, no way! Like, everything you do that's negative is okay because you've got it under control. But what they, so really, I mean, my personal style is to make sure that, if the team aren't being negative enough, if they're kind of being too guarded about their language and what they're saying, then I will just make up negative things, right? Or I shall find some negativity and I shall approach it in a fashion that calls it out. Oh, this is happening. This is terrible. Like, oh, we're going to do. Oh, okay, solved. Solved. We've all fixed it. Brilliant. To teach a pattern of behaviour that addresses it and doesn't, it doesn't make the wheels fall off the plan. So essentially, a lot of these behaviours are about normalising it yourself first, and then people will take a lead from that and follow. They'll go, oh, actually, Matt did that, and that proceed. If you can fight, if it can be more serious than what you think they're going to come to you, even better, right? If you can have the biggest crisis in the team, that's the easiest thing to deal with because then all the other things will seem smaller to everyone else. So I tend to try that as my technique.
Thank you. We have some comments. Our audience really likes the analogies, the card game, the naval navigation, and the airplane communication. With that said, I have another question. When you were showing us the naval navigation points that every ship has to adhere to, I thought about how great it was that there was a specific point to state a solution. It doesn't matter whether it's the correct solution or if it's the best solution, but you have to state a solution to the current problem at hand. Is this something that you advocate within your teams, or do you give them this presentation when they come join you in a certain organization? How do you advocate for this kind of behavior?
Well, unfortunately, when people join anything that I'm doing, they probably get bored of hearing me talk about sort of crazy theories and strategies. So I don't think they suffer from not knowing what I think, but probably too much so. But again, it's like everything. The reason that militaries or people train in a repetitive fashion is because it comes natural, right? And if you're always just stating problems, there's a place for that, right? You have to, people have to state problems, and if that's the only place you get to, great. It's got to become habitual, and what happens is, with junior members of staff or people that are inexperienced or, people that just haven't done that thing in that industry, what happens, it's a little bit annoying at first because they state solutions that are just clearly wrong and everyone's like, oh God, this is ridiculous, right? That's not going to work. We've tried that before, the worst response in the world. We did that 20 years ago, it didn't work. The way to alienate your entire less experienced workforce. And what happens over time is that it becomes habitual and it gets better, right? Those solutions improve, right? And then people would never dream of thinking about coming, all they end up doing is coming with solutions. They stop the other bits, right? They stop worrying about the problem. They just come to you with solutions. And it's the normalization through repetition of those behaviors that, for me, find that they're, and as I say, what you've got to be careful of is you don't devalue the early iterations, right? Because they'll be rubbish, right? Because we were all rubbish. When I think back to some of the things I suggested in my early career, and some of them now, it's embarrassing, but you have to let people move on from them and forgive them, right? And so I think that's the key, this habitualization of those kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I totally agree with you. And here is one more question. How would you define being on fire? Sorry, I just want to interrupt here because in the presentation we could see that you shouldn't set yourself on fire, but you also kind of made the point about how if you are not on fire, perhaps you won't be inspiring the teams that you're leading. So I want to rephrase the question a little bit and say, where is the melting point of the fire that needs to be burning inside of you?
Yeah, I suppose I'm guilty here of terribly mixing up my analogies. So being on fire, as in being awesome and inspiring, I think it's a different. I'm not talking about that here in this really. As somebody working with other people, leadership or not, you kind of want to inspire your colleagues through something, knowledge, skill, just outright enthusiasm, something. You want to be able to inspire that. That on fire is not. I'm talking about specifically, the dangerous fire, and that's how I define it. Essentially causing damage. So. Not doing things that ensure quality. If you're talking about in a technical sense, taking shortcuts, maybe poor quality code, maybe cutting corners in testing, cutting corners in business analysis, in understanding the problem. Small things that add up to big things down the line. We all know that shortcuts at the beginning are very expensive to rectify at the end. So that's being on fire. A little fire. You're on fire a little, you're smouldering because you're just burning things at the edges. You're not destroying things, but as you touch them, if you imagine like the Midas touch, you're just making things glow as you touch them. And then on fire, it's causing serious damage. And for me personally, the most serious damage is the damage in the mental health of your colleagues. It's unforgivable. People will never forgive you for that as a leader. They'll forgive you almost anything else. But if you damage their personal relationships, damage their life, they'll just move on and have a very bad memory of the experience. And I don't think you've got the right to do that as a leader, essentially, unless maybe there's a few exceptions to that. So that's the fire and the being on fire is. So just not causing damage, leaving things a little bit better than when you touch them. You can make them a little bit better or a lot better. At worst, neutral. Just don't damage things.
Thank you very much. We are shortly running out of time here. So I just wanted to show you this little mug that we are going to send you in the mail so that you can remember this awesome presentation for at least the rest of this mug. And with that said, I thank you for staying with us and for giving us this awesome presentation.